Hi, we're here with Andy Yan, the director of Simon Fraser University's City program. And Andy has spent the last couple of weeks really drilling into these numbers that were released last month by the Canadian federal government, looking at the issue of housing ownership in Metro Vancouver. Andy, can you tell us what are some of the more interesting things that you've noticed and discovered as you've drilled into these numbers?
Well, then I think the most interesting thing is starting from the fact that the view from Ottawa, the view from the region, actually changes a lot when we go down to the view on the ground. And I think really a lot of my work for the last couple of weeks has been drilling down to the data, looking at how things look in terms of non-resident ownership. When we look at things like dwelling type, year of construction, values, as well as really where they are. And I think that it's been interesting to kind of see elements of really where things are concentrated when it comes to non-resident ownership, whether that be largely within Richmond and Vancouver in terms of non-resident ownership with certain parts of West Vancouver, that we see a lot of non-resident ownership concentrate, particularly within the higher end of the residential real estate market. But then I think going in towards particularly towards higher end condominiums. And I think it just really gives us a great peek at really one of the great mysteries of residential real estate in metropolitan Vancouver.
What does that suggest to you, that higher end condominiums in some of these more expensive municipalities like Vancouver and Richmond? What does it suggest that those higher end ones are more likely to be owned by non-resident owners?
Well, I think that actually, come to think of it, I think one of the kind of key things is to think it's the mid and higher ends, that it's certainly weighted, just because of their nature, it has a tendency of weighting towards higher end prices. But then it's really talking about a range of housing values, which is actually from what one might say is about the mid to high end. And I think that what it tells me is that the role of having residential units as someone's secondary home is certainly present in places like Vancouver as well as Richmond. And I think that leads into, I think, some key ideas around, key challenges towards housing zoning and planning policy.
And what are the impacts of that, the consequences of that for average kind of everyday tax-paying local working families?
I think that's something that still needs to be further examined, but I think that when you come out to numbers about, whether that be from 10 to 15 to almost 20% of certain housing types built at certain times in certain municipalities being non-resident owned, I think that it leads in towards a question of should they be treated the same? That should someone's secondary, tertiary, or beyond type of home should be taxed the same as someone's primary home. And I think that leads into some really big questions in towards where we are going towards housing policy in the region.